had a productive meeting with our Resolute support partners, together with Afghanistan's acting Minister of Defense, Barami. We reviewed the security situation. Afghan forces are making progress, even though the situation remains very challenging. I saw both the progress and the challenges during my recent visit to Afghanistan with the US Defense Secretary Mattis. This year, the Afghan security forces have denied the Taliban their strategic objective of capturing a provincial capital. They have kept up the pressure on the insurgents across the country. And NATO remains committed to supporting them as they develop their capabilities, strengthen command and control, and prepare the next generation of military leaders. Today, we addressed 4 key issues: the troop level of our mission, funding for the Afghan forces, progress on reforms and reconciliation, and continued engagement with Pakistan. Currently, around 13,000 troops from 39 different countries serve in our Resolute support mission. Allies welcomed the United States briefing on the implications of the new South Asia strategy on our mission. This has already led to an increase in the US troop contribution. 27 nations have also committed to increase troop numbers in the coming months. So the size of Resolute support mission will increase from around 13,000 to around 16,000 troops. I strongly welcome the strengthened commitment and support demonstrated by all allies and partners. This remains critical to our progress. We also continue to support the financial sustainment of the Afghan security forces. We are committed to funding the Afghan security forces until at least 2020. In addition to the significant US contribution, other NATO allies and partners will continue to provide almost $1 billion each year to the Afghan defense and security forces. At our meeting today, Minister Barami expressed Afghanistan's appreciation of our continued support. He also made clear that Afghan government's intention is to make good on its commitments to make key reforms for good governance, the rule of law, fighting corruption, and protecting the rights of all Afghans, including women and girls. Today, we reaffirmed the importance of finding a lasting, negotiated political solution in Afghanistan. NATO will continue to support a peace and reconciliation process that is Afghan-led and Afghan-owned. We welcome the Kabul Process initiative launched by President Ghani earlier this year. We urge the government to do all it can to ensure the conditions for peace on the ground. And we urge all regional and international actors to support this process. Pakistan has a key role to play in ensuring the Taliban find no safe havens. And Afghanistan needs the constructive engagement of all its neighbors. Because peace and stability in Afghanistan means peace and stability in the whole region. Finally, let me note that the ministers from the United Arab Emirates and Qatar joined us today. They are seeking to contribute to the Resolute support mission. And their presence was a strong symbol of global support to the government and the people of Afghanistan.
I would ask how long NATO will stay in Afghanistan, and also was it difficult to get troops for Afghanistan?
This is now a condition-based mission, meaning that we stay there as long as we deem it necessary to stay there. But of course, it's not a totally open-ended mission. The aim is to enable the Afghans to take full responsibility for their own security without NATO troops present on the ground. But as the conditions are now, we see that it's an obvious need for NATO presence, and not only NATO presence, but also some increased NATO presence. We are not going back to a combat operation or a combat mission. What we do is to strengthen the training and the assistance and the advice to the Afghan troops. I think it's actually quite strong or quite impressive to see how committed NATO allies and partners are after 16 years. We have been there for 16 years, and NATO allies and partners continue to provide troops and funding for the Afghan forces. They do so because they see that stability in Afghanistan is important for their own security. They understand that by fighting terrorists in Afghanistan, we also make our own countries more secure. And by the fact that they have moved from a combat mission to a train, assist and advise mission, I think there is strong support. There is strong support for this, and we have many countries contributing with forces.
The Afghan government was committed to apply bold reforms in election commission and security sectors. Back in the country, Afghans are not satisfied. What more condition will you put on Afghan government to deliver its promises?
So we are sending a very clear message to Afghanistan and to the government of Afghanistan, and that is that the reform is extremely important. We need to strengthen the democratic institutions, we need Afghanistan to fight corruption, and we need, of course, elections. Because elections are important for the credibility of all the democratic reforms, and it is also, in the long run, important for the development of the whole Afghan society. So we continue to raise the importance of reform, including elections, in all our engagements with Afghanistan, and was stressed by many allies during the meeting today.
Defense ministers also discussed NATO-led Resolute support mission in Afghanistan alongside our coalition partners, non-NATO nations which gathered with us. We discussed orchestrating our fight against terror and the next steps from Afghanistan actually to the Middle East over the 2 days. Specifically to Afghanistan, reconciliation remains the political goal of NATO's military campaign and our comprehensive approach. Reconciliation must be Afghan-led, with an open door to the Taliban if they choose to stop killing and live by the Afghan Constitution. This strategy, carried out by, with, and through our Afghan partners and within the coalition framework, ensures this regional campaign is politically, fiscally, and militarily sustainable. NATO nations and coalition partners are in the process of finalizing troop increases and additional support efforts. Over 24 nations have stated that they intend to raise the troop numbers that they have on the ground there now, including some very small nations for whom this is the largest overseas deployment they have been engaged in. We appreciate their commitment to stabilizing the South Asia region.
One mystery, I think, for a lot of us in there so far is what exactly is changing with Pakistan. In light of the additional requests for troops here and at home in the United States, what is changing? Can you provide any specifics? And is that going to be sufficient to not undermine U.S. and coalition operations in Afghanistan? Yeah.
Dan, this is, as you know, a key part of the strategy. When we talk about the strategy, ladies and gentlemen, we talk about 4 R's, and it starts with regionalization. It also goes to realigning our forces, reinforcing them, and to reconciliation, the political goal of them. There's no military campaign that doesn't have a political goal. In this case, it starts with regionalization, directly pointed at the point that you made about the problem that we've incurred with organizations, no matter how badly they get beat up, they retreat across the border and then they come back again. So what we want to do is start with, from India to across the region, is make certain that everyone's working off the same sheet of music. We want to make certain that no terrorist organization can find a haven anywhere. And with a border adjoining Afghanistan, that makes Pakistan a priority. So we're engaging with the Pakistanis. We're engaging a whole government effort. We've got international efforts going on. And one of the reasons we brought it up here was to make certain we were all aligned about where we stood on this. And it was remarkable alignment about us all working together to get Pakistan to do everything it can to cut the insurgents off, the terrorists off. As far as what's different about this, obviously there are ways that we can reward Pakistan and there's ways that we can ensure they're held to account. But our principle going into this is that we are going to work with Pakistan and make this work so that there's no longer a threat coming across the border there. And this is an international effort. This isn't an American alone effort. So that in itself, that we're aligned internationally now with what we're doing, is probably the biggest change.
You've heard from both the Secretary General and the Secretary of Defense prior to my time with you. So I'll keep my remarks brief and we'll get right into the questions. But I did want to touch upon a few points. So we're moving ahead with unity of effort as we go forward from here. A stable Afghanistan is in everyone's interest, and it will contribute to regional stability. The cost of failure in Afghanistan would be great and would be felt worldwide. A secure Afghanistan is key to deterring terrorist activity and migration. And so the fact that a NATO-led coalition that involves 39 nations is working to accomplish this is an imperative for success. As partners in this coalition, we have all come together here to review our work, and we're moving forward together. When you look at the new U.S. South Asia strategy coupled with the NATO Warsaw commitments, you see that we have a renewed commitment to Afghanistan, and this collective strategy is guided by conditions on the ground, not timelines. The bottom line to this is that the Taliban cannot win. They must reconcile. And in 2017, we helped the Afghans to increase military pressure with some increase in train advised assist capacity and air power. But as you're aware, and as I said yesterday to some of you, we fought in 2017 at a lower level of capability. So we welcome the increases that are being made by many of our allies. It's especially impressive that 24 nations have committed to increasing their force levels. And of course, those numbers will continue to be worked out as the nations go through their own internal political decision-making cycles, and that is all brought together with the alliance. But it's good news as we see these increases arrive on the battlefield in the coming year. So this year we saw some changes in how the Afghans fought on the battlefield. They were on the offensive in up to 6 core areas at a time, and this enabled them to achieve some local tactical successes in places like Helmand, Kandahar, Uruzgan, and Kunduz. We saw the enemy shift after their failure to take any provincial capitals, shift to districts and attempt to maintain their relevance through suicide attacks. I'll point out that this is a sign of failure, the fact that they had to shift from trying to seize and hold new terrain to attempting to just inflict casualties to maintain relevance in their eyes. These recent spate of attacks that occurred in the last 3 weeks were an attempt by the Taliban at the end of the season to prove that they were still present and still capable of inflicting casualties. Sadly, the majority of these casualties were civilians and were not security forces. We'll work with our Afghan partners through the winter to maintain pressure on the enemy, even as they regenerate and prepare for the spring. Again, the Taliban will not be able to win in the face of this increased military pressure, this increased diplomatic pressure on the external enablers, and the increased social pressure that will come at the ballot box as elections are held over the next 2 years. So part of the U.S. South Asia policy and certainly NATO's commitment is to a viable peace process, and what we heard today from the ministers was strong commitment to that end. So this is all extremely encouraging. Again, to wrap this up, the combination of this U.S. South Asia policy, the Warsaw Summit commitments, the increasing capabilities of the Afghan security forces, the willing partnership we have with the Afghan government, and this renewed pressure on external enablement will move us in the right direction, which is a peace process to bring about a political solution to this conflict. So today's meeting and the increased troop commitments that we heard about from our NATO partners, 24 nations agreeing or committing to increases, will maintain the momentum that we need going forward. Our coalition is proving the enemy's theory of victory wrong. They believe that they would win because NATO, and particularly the U.S., lack the political will. That has been proven wrong by the Warsaw Summit commitments and the U.S. South Asia policy, and indeed by what you saw here today with 24 nations recommitting to Afghanistan.
I would like to ask, because I find it very contradictory that we are talking peace and reconciliation process with the Taliban, and we think we are about to win, so they have to now reconcile. At the same time, we are also talking about protecting women's rights. So how are we going to ensure that we have reconciled and the Taliban would not take over what we have accomplished, or the women of Afghanistan accomplished through the 16 years, and would not take that away from them?
Right.
Thank you.
So we are fighting and talking at the same time, and we're going to continue to do that. But we're also messaging the enemy that they cannot win. So the sooner they choose the path of peace, lay down their weapons, and rejoin society, the better for everyone. They'll stop bringing hardship on the Afghan people. They themselves and their families can live in peace, and the whole country would prosper from this. So we want to ensure that even as we fight, even as we increase military pressure, even as we increase pressure on the enablers of the terrorists, even as we increase social pressure inside the country, that the door is always open for a conversation about peace. Some will walk through it, some won't. And their choices are simple: either reconcile or face irrelevance or death. And so these are their choices. To this point, the conversation about peace has always included respect for the Afghan Constitution and the human rights provisions of that Constitution, which address the things that you're concerned about. And I would also add that given the way that the coalition has been committed to Afghanistan for now 16 years, I don't think you're going to see anyone in this coalition walk away from those basic constitutional provisions that we've all supported for this entire war.
We do see an increasing pressures on Pakistan after President Trump announced his new policy for Afghanistan and South Asia. But in practice, I'm sure you are in a deep conversation with Pakistani government and establishment and the military leadership. Do you see changes in their behavior yet, or it's the same as it was?
No, I haven't seen any change yet in their behavior. But as you cited, Abdullah, you've heard the public statements from President Trump, from Secretary Mattis, from Chairman Dunford, from Secretary Tillerson. So we're engaging at the very highest levels with the Pakistanis to work together with them against these terrorists that are undermining the stability of the entire region. And as we all know, Pakistan has fought hard and suffered heavily against those terrorists focused on its government. And now we're asking them to focus on the terrorists that are attacking Afghanistan and that are attacking the coalition. And so this is the dialogue we're having with Pakistan. The United States has been very clear about the direction we want to go. And we hope to see some change in the coming weeks and months. And as Secretary Mattis said earlier today, there'll be incentives if they work with us and disincentives if they don't.
Some Afghan officials, military officials and civilians officials claim that Russia is supporting Taliban. Have you seen any evidence that Russia is supporting Taliban?
Yeah, I think that as this has been in the news quite a bit, number one, I'd say we've seen evidence of Russia supporting Taliban by lending them political legitimacy, by claiming through their narrative that the Taliban are successful against Daesh, more successful than the government against Daesh. This is false. The government and the U.S. counterterrorism forces are the ones that are fighting ISIS and the ones that are restricting ISIS's movements, killing its emirs, killing its fighters, and squeezing their so-called caliphate into the mountains of southern Nangarhar. The proof of this is in the fact that we have seen no significant migration of Daesh fighters from Syria to Afghanistan, and we won't. Because of the pressure being put on ISIS by the Afghan Special Forces and the U.S. Special Operations Forces, we are working hard to ensure that there is not a migration of these fighters. This is fundamental to this false narrative from Russia. So Russia paints a picture of ISIS spilling over into Central Asia, and this is the justification for what support they lend to the Taliban. And what we're saying is that Afghanistan and the United States are fighting Russia's fight for them. We are fighting the terrorists in Afghanistan. And what they need to be doing is supporting the Afghan government in its fight against these terrorists, and by this way they can secure their own interests. I would also add that there's areas of mutual interest between Russia and the coalition in Afghanistan. Counter-narcotics. Narcotics kill tens of thousands of Russian citizens every year. Counterterrorism, again, I've spoken to that. And also the desire for peace and stability in the region. So these are three areas that we hope to work with the Russians on going forward. And NATO has committed to that through a number of fora. They had the NATO-Russia Council that met recently to discuss some of these issues. There was a delegation from Russia that recently visited Kabul. So we hope that going into the future, the neighbors and other nations like Russia will work with us in the international community. And again, you've got over 39 nations now committed to helping in Afghanistan. We hope to see Russia work with us towards our common interests.
Here in NATO, there is talk of adaptability. How quick are Afghans to adapt to the new tactics that are employed by the Taliban? And because recently we've been seeing some nasty attacks that are committed by the Taliban.
Yeah, I think that the Afghan forces are extremely adaptable. And part of this, let me just take a minute to talk about Afghanistan, as you all well know. The majority of the population is under the age of 27, something like 70% of the population. We're seeing an army that's achieving a generational change in the leadership of the Afghan military. You're going to speak later today with Minister Bakrami. He is the personification of this change. When President Ghani changed out the leadership in May of the Army, he lowered the average age by 10 years of the Corps commanders. Okay, so what we're doing is reaching into that next generation. This generation is educated, committed, energetic. They want a better future. These are the change agents that are going to take Afghanistan forward and the ones that are adapting. Let's talk about adaptability. This is an army now that has developed the best special operations force in the region. If you're to go out and visit with the Afghan commandos, the Katehas, the special police units, these units are the best in the region. And you would see almost no difference between them and the special operating forces of other nations. You know, sadly, we've had some attacks inside Kabul. At every one of those attacks, you'll see the special police unit 222 appears on the scene and more often than not reduces the situation, kills the terrorists, protects individuals, as they did at Shamshad TV just this week. As soon as they appear, the Taliban and the terrorists lose. So this is the quality we're talking about. So this is a form of adaptability. Another example would be the Air Force. We have Afghan pilots who, since we first flew our first combat sortie of the A-29 aircraft last year, have dramatically increased the use of Afghan air power. And then this air is controlled by Afghan tactical air controllers on the ground. We have our first 4 Black Hawk helicopters have arrived in Afghanistan. Afghan pilots are being trained on the Black Hawk helicopter. So they're extremely adaptable to the technologies necessary to go forward and to the tactics of the enemy. So part of this is, again, getting this younger generation of leaders. Another example I'd use is General Ahmadzai, who's the commander of the 215th Corps in Helmand. So since he has taken leadership of that corps, they've actually gone on the offensive in Helmand and retaken districts like Nawa that had been in enemy hands for 2 years. And this is a result of his leadership and his ability to bring together the security forces in that area to fight extremely well. So I'd say we have many examples, many success stories inside the Afghan security forces of adaptability and competence. And so It's those stories that give me the confidence to know that they are going to be successful and that the Taliban cannot win in the face of these forces.
You talked about reconciliation with the Taliban,
yes.
but unfortunately over the last few years that we can see, you know, there is an increase of attacks on the civilians. Each time we talk about reconciliation, they attack more mosques, they attack schools, restaurants, airport, whoever they see. So unfortunately, the Taliban actually perceive this kind of reconciliation as, in their own terms, as begging. So in their statements, I mean, we can clearly see that they don't really obey to any sort of, you know, that way of narrative. So my question is there like, you know, a plan B in case if they don't really abide by that rule, which they haven't so far? Is there really a strict and firm a stance against them going to be taken?
Right, thanks, Tadej. So the 4-year roadmap that President Ghani designed and put out last year lays out a process by which the government expands control over the population and the territory of the country. So this is the base plan which drives the enemy to either reconcile or face irrelevance. And so the point here is with the doubling of the commandos and the tripling of the Air Force, and with the addition of NATO and U.S. advisors, the U.S. advisors going down to the brigade and the Kandak level, this will increase the pressure on the enemy, and over the next 2 years, it will enable the Afghan forces to expand control of the country to 80%. So what this will have the effect of is driving the enemy out of those areas that are contested right now, about a third of the country, and into more remote areas where, frankly, they'll be irrelevant. And so their choices are either to reconcile or live in irrelevance in less than 10% of the country, or frankly, to die. And this is what they face. With the pressure on their sanctuaries in Pakistan, they will be put in really a position of having to return to Afghanistan and face one of these three choices. I'm very encouraged by the social outreach we see that's occurring. When I visit Kandahar and meet with many of the tribal leaders there, many of whom have members of their tribes in the Taliban, they say they are engaged in a dialogue. The Taliban are tired of war. They're disappointed with their leadership. Remember, their leadership has turned mainly to criminal activity. So the Taliban has turned into an organization that profits from the drug trade, and this is one of the motivations that their leaders have for continuing the fight. And they're very happy to send out these young men to die while they profit from the narcotics trafficking, the illegal mining, the extortion networks, the kidnapping. This is what the Taliban have become. And so as this pressure is applied in the country, those young people that are joining the Taliban will have a choice to make as well. I think, to your point, though, there needs to be a conversation, a social outreach within Afghanistan with the Taliban, and so this is an Afghan conversation. It's not one that I'm involved in, but this needs to occur in terms of bringing them in, convincing them of what the future looks like, and show them how their future would be better by joining society and not remaining on the outside. So it's an extremely important issue, and there does have to be a bit of social mobilization, if you will, that needs to occur on the peace effort, and we are beginning to see some signs of it with the peace shores around the country.
You said that you expected Russia to work together with you, pushing the common interests. How do you think it is possible, taking into consideration NATO's decision to suspend all practical cooperation with Russia and on Afghanistan between other issues? Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you for the question. So, international relations, of course, are very complex. There's areas where we share common interests and areas where our interests will differ. I think Afghanistan is one of those areas in the three categories I mentioned: counter-narcotics, counter-terrorism, and peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan, where we share interests with Russia. And so our hope would be that we can work with Russia to secure our common interests. This would only be good for all of us: greater stability in Central Asia. It would reduce migration. It would reduce the potential for terrorists emanating from the region, and it could benefit all nations economically. And it certainly would be better for the Afghan people who have suffered enough after 4 decades of war. So I think it is possible to compartment certain issues, and I would hope that that can happen with Russia and NATO working together on what's best for the future of Afghanistan. Thank you. We see at the beginning of the year, President Ghani replaced many of the key leaders at the highest level. So 5 of the 6 corps commanders were new. When he did this, he lowered the average age of these commanders by 10 years. This was a younger, more energetic, and combat experienced group, and it showed on the battlefield. So even though the end result of the year remained roughly the same as it began, with 2/3 of the population under Afghan control, we saw greater offensive operations and greater initiative being taken on the battlefield. Well, we saw 24 countries talk about increases, and we realize that each nation has its own domestic political cycle that they have to work through, but overall it's extremely encouraging. And this sends a very strong message to the Afghan security forces, the Afghan people, about the commitment of NATO and the commitment of the United States to their future. It's a conditions-based, not a time-based commitment. So this is extremely important. And so this is all designed to convince the enemy, of course, that they cannot win in the face of this pressure, in the face of improved Afghan performance on the battlefield, and in the face of renewed international will. So some of the key elements of this are: number 1, to improve the leadership; number 2, improve the fighting capabilities, primarily the offensive capability; number 3, to reduce the corruption. So let me talk about some of those specifically. So on the improvements to the leadership, we're seeing merit-based leadership selections. We're seeing a new law governing retirement, which will actually bring in the next generation of leaders who are better educated and younger and more energetic. On the offensive capabilities, what we're doing is doubling the size of the commandos, tripling the size of the Air Force. Remember, the commandos have never been defeated in battle against the Taliban. They are the ones who conduct 70% of the offensive operations. By doubling them, we are going to enable the Afghans to expand population control to 80%. On counter-corruption, another significant area, President Ghani is very committed. We have audits in the Afghan banking system and in the Ministry of Finance to ensure that the donations provided by the NATO nations are going for their intended purpose. And so these audits are unprecedented. They've never been allowed before. We also are biometrically enrolling every soldier and every policeman in the Afghan security forces so that there are no more ghost soldiers where pay money is being diverted for illicit purposes. We've also seen big improvements in the fuel accountability. So these areas alone, pay and fuel, amount for about $1 billion of assistance to the Afghans that are now being safeguarded by against corrupt practices. So we're seeing progress in all these areas thanks to President Ghani's leadership and cooperation. The number one thing is this recommitment of international will. So war is a contest of wills. And if the enemy believes that you have lost your will, then they will win. This year, between the Warsaw Summit Declaration and the U.S. South Asia policy announcement, we sent a very clear signal to the enemy that we have the will to win, that we will stay as long as necessary to get the job done. The Afghans are in the lead, but the international community is not backing down. So this strong demonstration of international will, and most recently here at the Defense Ministerials, 24 nations committing to increase their presence, sends a very clear signal to the enemy. They cannot win, and therefore their best option is to engage in a peace dialogue. In 2018, we're going to see the Afghan security forces go on the offensive, and they're going to retake areas that have either been contested or been under Taliban control. And key to this effort are going to be the commandos, the special police units, and the Afghan Air Force. These units are the best in the region, and if you were to look at them in training or on the battlefield, you wouldn't be able to tell a difference between them or allied commandos. So these forces have never lost a battle against the Taliban. They are the ones that are going to take the fight to them this coming year, with the Army right there with them, holding the terrain that they regain. And so this is going to be a game changer on the battlefield next year. The Air Force will continue to grow over the coming years. It will triple in size, and it will include Western airframes. And these young Afghan pilots are going through the training pipeline right now. They're highly motivated, well-educated. They represent the best of this next generation of Afghans. So these two forces together, the commandos and the Air Force, they really represent the future of the Afghan security forces.
The US reaffirmed that they are in for the long haul. I think that blends perfectly with NATO's conditions-based approach. So our message is basically to the Afghans that we stand by them as long as our efforts are matched by their efforts. So what do I mean by our efforts? We will basically help them to get more effective in taking the fight against the enemy. We will not take on a combat role, but we will increase the so-called TAA effort. What does that mean? It's the Train, Advise, Assist mission, which NATO is currently conducting with its Resolute support mission in Afghanistan. And it's about transferring expertise and professionalism from NATO soldiers and partner soldiers to their Afghan comrades. I went through the experience of the first round of the presidential elections in 2014. I was at that time German Consul General in Mazar-i-Sharif. That was very heartening to see. People started to own a part of that state, and they were aware of it. And I think that's what you need to do in order to narrow the gap between the government and those who are governed. The international community stands ready to lend its support with election experts. And I think what we need in this country is, how shall I say, a general discussion on the form of elections, which involves not only the Independent Electoral Commission, but also government, the opposition, civil society. People have to feel at ease. You have to build trust. I mean, if elections are not done in a credible and transparent manner, they will not be worthwhile, and they will not move the country ahead, quite on the contrary. And let me assure you that NATO is doing all what it can in order to help the Afghan people to get back to credible and transparent and fair elections. We need to complement our increased military effort by increased political effort. What we are aiming at is an Afghan-owned and Afghan-led peace process. What do I understand by that? I'm engaging the Afghan government to prepare the ground for peace negotiations. The Afghan people have to decide for themselves under which terms they are willing to reconcile. Are they seeking retribution? Do they want to have peace? Do they want to give an amnesty? These are questions which need discussion. And other than that, I encourage the Afghan government to reach out to the reconcilable elements of the Taliban, and the time for that is now. Reconcilable means that they abide by the constitution, that they renounce to violence, and that they sever the ties with other terrorist groups. And there is a last foreign policy element to it. There cannot be peace in Afghanistan unless we engage Afghanistan's neighbors. And we have to convince them that taking on a constructive role on Afghanistan is in their own interest, as we would then move from a lose-lose situation, as we are currently facing it, to a win-win situation. Meeting such people inspires you with hope, and I keep on meeting such people, and there must be a reason for me to go to Afghanistan again, and that is exactly the people which instill me with hope. I think they deserve a chance, and they need our support, and that's the reason why I'm there. And I must say to you that I'm enjoying a good part of my work, as it is rewarding.